A young black artist walks into a swanky restaurant in downtown Chicago, looking for a quiet evening. But behind the counter stands the owner, wearing a cap with a loud slogan, whose eyes scream prejudice. An ordinary dinner turns into a battle for dignity, where every step raises the stakes. Will she be able to break down the wall of hatred, or will the city witness a new scandal? The golden hues of a Chicago sunset spilled across the bustling streets of the Loop, painting the skyscrapers in warm tones. At 28, Layla Jones felt the city's pulse sync with her own, a rhythm of ambition and resilience. She adjusted the strap of her leather satchel, her sketchbook peeking out, and pushed open the heavy glass door of Blake's Grill. The upscale restaurant, nestled between high-end boutiques and corporate towers, was a sleek monument to modern dining. Polished wood, dim lighting, and the faint clink of wine glasses. Layla had just sold her latest painting, a vibrant piece inspired by her grandmother's stories of the South Side, and tonight was her quiet celebration. She deserved this. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the hardwood floor as she approached the hostess podium. Behind it stood Harry Blake, the 50-year-old owner, his broad frame filling the space like a sentinel. His red, "Make America Great Again," cap sat prominently atop his head, the bold white letters clashing with the restaurant's refined aesthetic. His eyes, sharp and cold, flicked up from the reservation book, landing on Layla with an intensity that made her pause. She straightened, brushing a strand of her braided hair behind her ear, and offered a polite smile. "Good evening," she said, her voice smooth but firm. "Table for one, please." Harry didn't move. His fingers tapped the edge of the podium, a slow, deliberate rhythm. He leaned forward slightly, sizing her up as if she were a stray cat that had wandered into his domain. "We're full," he replied curtly, his tone clipped. He didn't even glance at the book. Layla's brow furrowed. She tilted her head, peering past him into the dining room. The place was far from packed. Half a dozen tables sat empty, their crisp white linens untouched, chairs neatly aligned. A couple in the corner sipped wine, their conversation a low hum, while a lone businessman scrolled his phone near the window. She turned back to Harry, her smile tightening. "I see plenty of open seats," she said, gesturing subtly with her hand. "Surely you can fit me in." Harry straightened, his smirk creeping wider, a glint of mockery in his eyes. "Those are reserved," he said, his voice dropping to a slow drawl. "For the dinner rush. You know how it is." Layla's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. She'd heard that tone before, the kind that masked something uglier beneath its surface. "It's pretty quiet for a rush," she replied evenly, her gaze steady. "I just like to sit and eat. That's all." Harry's smirk faltered for a split second before hardening into something colder. He leaned on the podium, his cap casting a shadow over his face. "Look, sweetheart," he said, his voice low and edged with condescension. "I don't think this is your kind of place. Maybe try somewhere more casual. There's a spot a few blocks over. Might suit you better." The words hit like a slap, but Layla didn't flinch. The air between them thickened, charged with an unspoken challenge. She adjusted her satchel, her fingers brushing the phone in her pocket. "My kind of place?" she repeated, her tone measured but sharp. "Care to explain what you mean by that?" Harry chuckled, a dark, grating sound that echoed in the quiet lobby. He folded his arms across his chest, his posture defiant. "Don't play dumb. You know exactly what I mean. We've got a certain vibe here, and I'm not sure you fit it. Simple as that." Layla's jaw tightened, her calm exterior a thin veil over the anger simmering beneath. She glanced around. Two patrons at a nearby table had stopped eating, their forks hovering as they watched the exchange. A young waiter, no older than 20, lingered near the kitchen door, his apron clutched in nervous hands. The room felt like it was holding its breath. "Simple as that," Layla echoed, her voice cutting through the silence. "So you're refusing me service because of how I look? Is that what you're saying?" Harry's eyes narrowed, his smirk twisting into a sneer. "I'm refusing you because I say so. My place, my rules. End of story." He jabbed a finger toward the door. "Now, why don't you take your attitude somewhere else before this gets messy?" Layla didn't budge. Her hand slipped into her pocket, pulling out her phone. She tapped the screen, the red recording dot blinking to life. "Messy," she said, holding the device steady. "I'd like your name, and I'd like you to repeat what you just said. For the record." Harry froze, his face tightening as he stared at the phone. Then he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made the waiter flinch. "You think you can scare me with that?" he barked, loud enough to draw every eye in the room. "Go ahead, record it. Post it. I don't care. People are tired of folks like you making everything a damn issue." The murmurs grew louder. A woman at the bar whispered to her companion, her eyes darting between Layla and Harry. The waiter, Kyle, his name tag read, stepped forward hesitantly, his voice trembling. "Mr. Blake, maybe we should just—" "Stay out of it, Kyle," Harry snapped, cutting him off. He turned back to Layla, his face reddening beneath the brim of his cap. "You've got 10 seconds to leave, or I'm calling the cops. Your choice." Layla's lips curled into a tight, defiant smile. "Good," she said, her voice steady as steel. "Call them. Let's see what they think about you denying me service for no reason other than your prejudice." She kept the phone raised, her dark eyes locked on his. "I'm not going anywhere." Harry's confidence wavered, just for a moment. His hand twitched toward the phone on the wall, but he hesitated, his gaze flickering to the patrons, now openly staring. The woman at the bar pulled out her own phone, aiming it at him. The businessman by the window shifted uncomfortably, his meal forgotten. Kyle hovered nearby, his expression a mix of fear and frustration. "You're making a mistake," Harry growled, his voice lower now, laced with venom. "You don't know who you're messing with." "No," Layla shot back, her tone unflinching. "You don't know who you're messing with." The tension snapped taut, the restaurant a powder keg ready to ignite. Harry stormed to the wall, yanking the receiver off the hook, his movements jerky with rage. Layla stood her ground, her phone capturing every second, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. Outside, the Chicago evening buzzed on, oblivious to the storm brewing within Blake's grill, a storm that was about to spill far beyond its polished walls. The air inside Blake's grill crackled with tension as Harry Blake slammed the phone receiver against his ear, his knuckles white with fury. The polished dining room, once a sanctuary of clinking glasses and murmured conversation, now felt like a stage under harsh spotlights. Layla Jones stood firm, her phone steady in her hand, the red recording but a silent witness to the storm unfolding. Harry's voice boomed through the receiver, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yeah, this is Blake's Grill. I've got a woman here causing trouble. Won't leave when I've told her we're full. She's disruptive, filming me, making a scene. Send someone quick." Layla's lips parted in a sharp breath, but her gaze didn't waver. "Disruptive?" she repeated, loud enough to carry over his words. She turned her phone slightly, panning across the room to capture the half-empty tables, the wide-eyed patrons and Kyle, the young waiter, shifting nervously near the kitchen. "Does this look like a disruption to you?" Harry slammed the phone down, the bang echoing like a gunshot. He whirled on her, his face a furious shade of red beneath his cap. "You think you're clever, huh?" he snarled, stepping closer, his bulk looming over her petite frame. "Twisting my words, playing the victim? I'm not falling for it. Get out. Now, or you'll regret it." Layla didn't flinch. Her heart hammered, but her voice stayed calm, cutting through his bluster like a blade. "I'll leave when you explain why you're refusing me service. Or is it too hard to admit what's really going on here?" She tilted her head, her dark eyes boring into his. "Say it, Harry. Say why I don't fit your vibe." The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in as the standoff intensified. A woman at the bar, a middle-aged blonde in a tailored blazer, set her wine glass down, her phone now recording too. "This is unreal," she muttered to her companion, who nodded, eyes wide. Kyle took a hesitant step forward, his voice shaky. "Mr. Blake, she's not doing anything wrong. Maybe we could just—" "I said stay out of it." Harry roared, his hands slashing through the air. Kyle stumbled back, his apron twisting in his grip. Harry turned back to Layla, his sneer deepening. "You want an explanation? Fine. This is a high-class joint, and we cater to a certain crowd. You waltz in here like you own the place, but you don't belong. Go try that dive bar on 63rd, bet they'll take you." The words hung heavy, their venom unmistakable. A gasp rippled through the room. The businessman by the window dropped his fork, his meal forgotten, while the couple in the corner exchanged uneasy glances. Layla's fingers tightened around her phone, but she kept her composure, her voice low and deliberate. "A dive bar on 63rd? That's what you think I deserve? Say it clearer, Harry. Tell everyone why I don't belong here." Harry's eyes blazed, his chest heaving. "You people always push," he spat, his voice rising. "Always looking to make a problem where there isn't one. I'm done with this. Get out before I throw you out myself." The threat landed like a spark on dry tinder. The blonde woman stood, her phone still rolling. "You can't talk to her like that," she snapped, her voice trembling with indignation. "This is disgusting." Her companion tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Sit down, Karen." But she shook him off, glaring at Harry. Layla seized the moment, her voice steady but sharp. "Throw me out? For asking to eat? Go ahead. Let's see how that looks on camera." She held her phone higher, her gaze unflinching. "You're digging your own grave, and everyone here sees it." Harry's face contorted, his bravado cracking as the weight of the room shifted against him. He jabbed a finger at her, his voice shaking with rage. "You're the one who'll regret this. You think you can ruin me? I've been running this place for 20 years. People know me, not you." "Then let's let them decide." Layla shot back, her tone icy. "Call your cops. I'll wait." The distant wail of a siren cut through the tension, growing louder by the second. Harry's smirk returned, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. "Looks like your little game's up," he said, folding his arms. "Should have left when you had the chance." Layla didn't move. The siren grew deafening, then stopped abruptly as red and blue lights flashed through the windows. The door swung open, and a police officer stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, his badge glinting under the chandelier. His eyes swept the scene, Harry glowering behind the podium, Layla standing tall with her phone, the patrons frozen in their seats. "What's the problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Harry jumped in, his words tumbling out in a rush. "She's causing a disturbance, officer. Refusing to leave after I told her we're full. She's been aggressive, filming me, stirring up trouble. I want her gone." The officer raised an eyebrow, turning to Layla. "Mom." Layla lowered her phone slightly, her voice even. "That's not what happened. I came here to eat. He refused me service, said I don't belong here, and told me to go to a dive bar instead. When I asked why, he threatened to throw me out and called you. I've recorded everything." She held up the device, the screen still glowing. The officer's gaze shifted to the empty tables, then back to Harry. "Doesn't look full to me," he said, his tone dry. Harry's face flushed deeper, his mouth opening to protest, but before he could speak, Kyle stepped forward, his hands trembling. "Officer," Kyle said, his voice barely above a whisper, "she's telling the truth. Mr. Blake wouldn't let her sit, and it's not the first time he's done this. He picks who he serves. I've seen it." The room fell silent, the weight of Kyle's words sinking in. Harry's head snapped toward him, his eyes blazing. Shut your mouth, Kyle. You're fired," he bellowed, his voice cracking. The officer held up a hand. "Enough. Both of you calm down." He turned to Layla, his expression softening slightly. "Ma'am, do you want to file a complaint?" "Yes," Layla said, her voice resolute. "For racial discrimination and harassment. I've got it all on video." Harry's smirk vanished, his hands clenching into fists. The officer nodded, pulling out a notepad. "All right, let's get your statement." He glanced at Harry, his tone hardening. "And you, sir, might want to think about what you say next. This isn't looking good for you." Outside, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the flashing lights. Phones were out, recording the scene through the windows. Layla's heart pounded, but she felt a spark of something new, strength, fueled by the truth she'd captured. Harry glared at her, his world starting to unravel, but she met his gaze without fear. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Chicago night buzzed with restless energy as Layla Jones stepped out of Blake's grill, the cool air a sharp contrast to the stifling tension inside. Red and blue police lights pulsed against the glass storefront, casting eerie shadows on the growing crowd outside. Her phone, still warm from recording, buzzed relentlessly in her hand. Texts from friends, alerts from social media. The video she'd posted mid-confrontation was already spreading, a spark igniting a fire she hadn't anticipated. She exhaled, steadying herself as the officer scribbled her statement, his pen scratching against the notepad. Across the street, a handful of onlookers held up their own phones, filming the scene. "That's her," a young woman shouted, pointing. "She's the one from the video." Layla glanced over, offering a small nod, but her focus shifted back to the restaurant's door as it burst open. Harry Blake stormed out, his cap skewed, his face a mask of fury. "You think this is over?" he bellowed, jabbing a finger at her. "You think you could just walk away and ruin me?" The officer stepped between them, his voice firm. "Mr. Blake, back off. Now." Harry ignored him, his chest heaving. "This is my town, my business. You don't get to waltz in here and tear it down." His voice cracked, desperation seeping through his bravado. Layla met his glare, her tone unflinching. "You tore it down yourself, Harry. All I did was hold up a mirror." She raised her phone again, the crowd murmuring as more cameras turned his way. Harry's eyes darted to the onlookers, his confidence faltering as he realized he was the spectacle now. Inside, Kyle emerged, his apron crumpled in his hands. He hesitated, then stepped toward the officer. "I meant what I said in there," he muttered, his voice shaking but resolute. He's done this before. Turned people away, made comments. "I've seen it for months." The officer's pen paused, his brow furrowing as he glanced at Harry. "You're done, Kyle," Harry roared, lunging forward, but the officer blocked him, a hand on his chest. "One more step, and you're in cuffs," the officer warned. Harry froze, his fists trembling, but Kyle pressed on. "Last month, he told me not to seat a black family. Said they'd scare off the regulars. I didn't say anything then, but I'm saying it now." The crowd erupted, gasps and angry murmurs swelling into a chant. "Shame on you! Shame on you!" Layla's heart raced. This wasn't just her fight anymore. Harry's face paled, his bravado crumbling as phones captured every word. He turned to the officer, his voice rising in panic. "This is a setup. They're lying to ruin me." The officer's expression hardened. "Sir, I suggest you calm down. We'll sort this out at the station if need be." He turned to Layla. "Ma'am, your complaint's filed. We'll be in touch." She nodded, her resolve stealing as the crowd's energy bolstered her. By morning, the video had exploded online. Hundreds of thousands of views, shares, comments flooding in. "This is disgusting. Boycott Blake's grill. She's a hero." Layla sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through the chaos, when her phone rang. It was a local reporter, Angela Carter. "Miss Jones, your story's everywhere," Angela said, her voice warm but urgent. "Can I get an interview? People need to hear from you." Layla hesitated, then agreed. Hours later, she stood outside Blake's grill, Angela's camera crew framing her against a growing protest. Signs waved high. No room for racism. Justice for Layla. She took a deep breath, facing the microphone. "I didn't want this fight," she said, her voice steady. "I just want a dinner. But when someone tells you you don't belong because of your skin, you can't stay silent. This is bigger than me now." The crowd cheered, their voices a roar that shook the street. Angela nodded, lowering the mic. "You're sparking something here, Layla." As the interview aired, Harry tried damage control, a shaky TV spot on a local news channel. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, sweat beading on his brow. "I'm not racist. But folks like her, they push, they provoke." Then a slip. "I built this place for my people, and I won't let them take it." The backlash was instant. His people trended online, fueling the protests. Inside Blake's grill, Harry watched the crowd swell, his hands trembling as he gripped the bar. His wife, Ellen, stood in the doorway, her face drawn. "Harry, this isn't blowing over," she said softly. "You've got to do something." "I'm not apologizing," he snapped, his voice hollow. They'll see I'm right. But the chants outside drowned him out, a tide he couldn't hold back. The courtroom hummed with anticipation as Layla Jones took her seat at the plaintiff's table, her sketchbook tucked into her satchel, a quiet reminder of the life she'd fought to reclaim. Weeks had passed since the confrontation at Blake's Grill, but the echoes of that night reverberated louder than ever. The protests had grown, the restaurant's windows now plastered with boycott flyers, its once bustling dining room a ghost town. Today, the battle moved to the legal arena, and Layla was ready. Her attorney, Sarah Wilson, a sharp-witted woman with a reputation for dismantling bullies, shuffled papers beside her. Across the room, Harry Blake slouched at the defense table, his cap gone, his suit rumpled. His lawyer, a young man with a nervous tic, whispered furiously, but Harry waved him off, his glare fixed on Layla. The judge, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair, banged her gavel. "Order. Let's begin." Sarah rose, her heels clicking as she approached the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and commanding. "This case is about accountability. My client, Layla Jones, walked into Blake's Grill expecting a meal. Instead, she faced humiliation, threats, and racial discrimination, all caught on video. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a violation of the law." She gestured to Layla. Miss Jones stood her ground, not just for herself, but for everyone who's been told they don't belong. "Today, we'll prove Harry Blake's actions weren't a fluke, they're a pattern." The jury leaned forward, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Harry's lawyer stood, his tone defensive. "My client's a businessman, not a bigot. He made a call that day, and it's been twisted into something it's not. He has the right to refuse service. End of story." He sat, casting a smug glance at Sarah, but the jury's eyes stayed on her. First witness, Kyle, the former waiter. He took the stand, his hands clasped tightly. "Mr. Blake told me not to serve certain people," he said, his voice steadying. "Black customers, mostly, so they didn't fit the image. I saw it over and over." The courtroom murmured, Harry shifting in his seat, his face darkening. Sarah pressed on. "Did he use racial language?" Kyle nodded. "Yeah, slurs, comments about their kind. He thought it was funny." A juror's mouth tightened, another scribbled notes. Harry's lawyer leapt up. "Objection. He's biased, fired for cause." The judge overruled. "The witness can speak." Next, Layla took the stand, her voice calm but resonant. "He said I didn't belong, told me to go to dive bar. Well, I pushed back. He threatened me, called the police. I recorded it because I knew he'd lie." The video played, Harry's venomous words filling the room, his sneer frozen on screen. The jury watched in silence, a few shaking their heads. Harry's lawyer cross-examined, his tone sharp. "You provoked him, didn't you? Wanted a fight." Layla's gaze didn't waver. "I wanted dinner. He made it a fight when he judged me by my skin." The lawyer faltered, retreating with a curt, "No further questions." Then a bombshell. Sarah called a former manager, Lisa Hayes. She strode in, her expression grim. "I quit because of Harry," she said. "He refused to hire minorities, said they'd lower the standard. I warned him it was illegal." He laughed. The courtroom buzzed, Harry's lawyer scrambling to object, but the judge waved him off. Harry couldn't hold back. "She's lying," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "They're all out to get me." The judge banged her gavel. "Control yourself, Mr. Blake, or you'll be removed." He sank back, his face a mix of rage and fear. Outside, protesters chanted, their voices faint but persistent. Sarah closed her questioning, turning to the jury. "This isn't one incident. It's who he is. You decide if that's acceptable." Layla watched Harry, his empire crumbling under the weight of truth she'd unleashed. The courtroom held its breath as the jury filed back in, their faces unreadable. Layla Jones sat rigid, her hands folded in her lap, the past weeks a blur of protests, threats, and sleepless nights. Sarah Wilson squeezed her shoulder, a silent anchor. Across the room, Harry Blake slumped, his bravado replaced by a hollow stare. His wife, Ellen, sat behind him, her eyes red-rimmed, her silence deafening. The judge adjusted her glasses. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood, his voice steady. We have, Your Honor. In the matter of Jones versus Blake, we find the defendant, Harry Blake, guilty of racial discrimination and harassment. A ripple of gasps swept the room. We award punitive damages to the plaintiff and mandate anti-discrimination training for his business. Layla exhaled, tears prickling her eyes as relief flooded her. Sarah grinned, whispering, You did it. The judge's gavel fell. Court adjourned. Supporters in the gallery erupted into quiet applause, while Harry sat motionless, his hands trembling. Ellen touched his arm, but he shook her off, storming out, his lawyer trailing helplessly. Outside, the Chicago sun blazed, protesters cheering as Layla emerged. Justice for Layla, they shouted, signs waving. Reporters swarmed, but she raised a hand, her voice cutting through. This isn't just my win, she said, her tone firm. It's for everyone who's been silenced, told they don't belong. We fought, legally, peacefully, and won. That's what matters. A young girl approached, clutching a drawing. You're my hero, she said shyly. Layla knelt, smiling. You're mine too. The crowd roared, their support a balm to her weary spirit. Weeks later, Blake's grill shuttered, its windows dark, its reputation ashes. Harry faced bankruptcy, the damages and boycotts a fatal blow. Ellen left, her parting words sharp. You chose pride over us. He stood alone in the empty restaurant, the bar his last refuge, his reflection a ghost of the man he'd been. Layla, meanwhile, poured her winnings into a South Side art studio for minority youth. Opening day buzzed with laughter, paint-stained hands creating beauty where pain once reigned. She hung her grandmother's portrait on the wall, whispering, This is for you. Online, messages poured in, You changed everything, thank you for fighting. At a community event, Layla spoke, her voice steady. This isn't the end, it's a start. Stand up, speak out. Justice isn't given, it's taken. The crowd cheered, her words a spark for a movement. Harry's world had collapsed under his own weight, but Layla's rose, stronger, brighter, a testament to resilience and truth.